Greetings, and welcome to Train Signal. You're watching Exchange 2013 Monitoring and Troubleshooting. In this lesson, we're pretty much going to discuss the various tools that are available and built in to Exchange 2013 for monitoring and troubleshooting. There's absolutely no way we can go through every type of situation that may come up that may cause a problem and analyze what the possible solutions might be. Not in one lesson, anyway. But there are tools that are provided, and in reviewing the various tools, you can be better prepared as an Exchange administrator because there's the monitoring side where you pretty much just sit back and let things work until something breaks. And then when something does break, there's that troubleshooting side. So there are tools that do both. Now, we're going to break the tools down into sections. There are discontinued tools that perhaps as an Exchange administrator, if you've worked with Exchange before, you've come to rely upon. Well, some have been discontinued. In fact, many have been discontinued. There are existing tools, ones that you've probably worked with or know about, and perhaps they've been enhanced or perhaps they've just been carried over. And there are new tools, which we always appreciate. It's always good to have new tools to do our job. Exchange has also taken a new path with a set of features called Server Health and Performance, and so we'll talk about those as well. And there are test commandlets. In fact, more test commandlets in Exchange 2013 than what we had in Exchange 2010 or 2007. Okay, so let's get started. So let's talk briefly about tools that are discontinued with Exchange 2013. And you might be surprised that some of these tools are going to be missing. So for starters, there's the Exchange Best Practice Analyzer. I love this tool. I don't know why they got rid of it. It was a great tool for determining whether or not the configuration that you have of your Exchange environment met up with Microsoft best practices. And what it did was it analyzed your whole environment, including your Active Directory, and then it spit back how you were faring in terms of meeting best practices, and then gave you some suggestions in terms of how to resolve the issue and bring your organization more in harmony with best practices. So that's gone. The Mailflow Troubleshooter is also gone. Now, this has actually been replaced with other tools that you can use, but this troubleshooter basically assisted with common Mailflow problems. So this has been retired now with Exchange 2013. You'll see when we talk about existing and new tools that there's a new tool called Delivery Reports that can pretty much fill in where the Mailflow Troubleshooter left off. Performance Monitor. Now, this is odd because we still have Performance Monitor in Server 2012 and 2008 R2, and the objects and counters are still there. But we had a special toolbox that we could click and go to, and if we selected the Performance Monitor, it would show us the key parameters, the objects and counters that relate to Exchange. So we still have a toolbox. It's pretty worthless at this point, and we'll take a look at it, but that Performance Monitor section is now gone. In addition, there was a Performance Troubleshooter, and this helped to identify various performance-related problems that might be affecting our Exchange server. That was also in the toolbox, and that's also gone. And last but not least, we had the Routing Log Viewer, and this was used to open routing log files so that you can look at information about the routing topology. So this is gone as well. So these are the tools that have been kicked to the curb. Let's take a look now at the tools that we still have, some that we had in previous versions of Exchange, and some that are brand new. So some of the existing tools and the new tools that we have for monitoring and troubleshooting include the Remote Connectivity Analyzer, which is not really a tool that's built into Exchange. It's actually an online site that you go to, and it helps to determine if your Exchange organization is set up properly for outside access and so forth. So the Remote Connectivity Analyzer is found through the toolbox, or you can find it by going through your browser to the Remote Connectivity Analyzer site. The queue viewer is a very basic tool that helps in seeing when a queue is starting to back up, and from there you're able to then figure out and troubleshoot and find out why is that queue backing up. Delivery Reports is a new feature in Exchange 2013, and it's basically a message tracking tool that you use in the Exchange Admin Center. We're going to take a look at this in a moment. Basically, you can search for delivery status on email messages that have been sent to or from user in your organization's address book, and you can look for certain subjects. You can track delivery information, and it's actually a pretty nice tool. It helps you to see the tracking of messages for up to 14 days after they were received or sent. Auditing is another tool that we looked at in a previous lesson, but we'll take a look at it again. It gives us the ability to very quickly get reports back regarding our Exchange environment, regarding even things like permissions and so forth, but more on the monitoring side, we get information about mailboxes themselves. And then if you're using tools like Exchange Online Preview or Online Protection, if you're using EOP, there's a tool called Message Trace. This is a feature that allows the administrator to follow email as it passes through Exchange Online Preview or Exchange Online Protection. So it's helpful in determining if the message is received, rejected, deferred, or delivered by the service. Being that we're not using EOP at this point, we're not going to be able to demonstrate Message Trace. But let's jump over to our Exchange server and let's take a look at these other tools that we have that we can take a look at through the toolbox and through the Exchange Admin Center. So here we are on our Exchange server. For starters, we're going to open up the toolbox. Here you can see the Exchange toolbox. It used to be built right into the Exchange Management console, but now that we're using the EAC, this has been kind of shifted off to this special toolbox tool. And as you can see, it's pretty worthless. Sorry to say. The toolbox used to have a lot of different tools, but as we mentioned, most of those have been discontinued. And so now we have this Details Templates Editor, and we have this Remote Connectivity Analyzer, and then we have the Queue Viewer. So if we just open up the Remote Connectivity Analyzer, it takes us to testexchangeconnectivity.com, and from here we can actually perform a variety of different tests regarding ActiveSync, web services, Outlook connectivity tests with Outlook Anywhere or Outlook Auto Discover, internet email tests of inbound and outbound SMTP. We can test Link, Office 365, we can test clients, so this is something actually that is still in beta. So they are constantly adding to this tool and making it better. And we can use this tool to test outside connectivity, as it says, remote connectivity. Now from here, we go back to the toolbox, and you can see there's the Queue Viewer, Manage Exchange Mail Queues. If we open this up, here we see basic information regarding what's happening with our different databases, different servers, and if we looked and we saw that the message count was off the charts, then we would know that we're having a problem with our queue. So we would go and check the server, we'd make sure services were up and running, we would make sure that everything is as it should be, and we would figure out why the queue is backing up. Obviously something is wrong. So this is not necessarily the best way to perform monitoring. We look at these tools and we say, well, okay, this is not a very proactive approach. So what's built into Exchange 2013 that's proactive? Well, there are behind-the-scenes features that are monitoring the health and performance of your server. But as far as being able to tap into those and being alerted as an Exchange administrator, there's really nothing that Exchange provides out of the box. And so Microsoft pushes us off to other products. So the real product here that you would want to consider if you were looking for a Microsoft product is System Center Operations Manager. And so that's a great tool because you can snap in various management packs to monitor various server types like your SharePoint servers, your domain controllers, and so forth. So it's not just Exchange specific, but it actually is good for your entire Microsoft environment. However, some look to more specific tools, tools that specifically focus in on Exchange itself. And so you might look at third-party tools that can assist with just Exchange, because that's typically easier to deploy than System Center Operations Manager. And then as an Exchange team, you might need or want a tool that is just focused on what your team is focused on, which is Exchange. So not much action going on here with the queue. You can see how this tool can be helpful. You can view messages, you can suspend, you can remove messages. So there's a lot that we can do from the Queue Viewer, but only if there's an actual problem, and we see that there is no problem at this point. If we go back to our Exchange Admin Center, You can see that we have other tools that we've talked about. For example, with compliance management, we talked about the auditing tab and all of the different auditing tools. We discussed this in a previous lesson. And under mail flow, here we see we have the tab Delivery Reports. And so this tool is really a great one because it helps us to search for delivery information about messages sent to or from a specific person. We can narrow down the search with keywords. So this is different from eDiscovery. This is a tool that really helps us with regard to making sure mail is flowing properly, making sure mail was indeed delivered, and that can be helpful in terms of being able to diagnose a problem when it comes to mail flow. Okay, so let's jump back over to our slides and let's talk a little bit about server health and performance, the various components and concepts that are built right into Exchange 2013 to assist when it comes to monitoring the health of our systems and then establishing various reactions when we see that a component is unhealthy. So let's talk about a couple of different concepts that have been introduced with Exchange 2013 with regard to server health and performance. So the first one is managed availability, and it's a concept that has two services at the heart of it, the Health Manager Worker process and the Health Manager service. Now the purpose of these services is to take measurements, to monitor the situation with the server, and to respond when alerted that a component is unhealthy. So this connects in with the workload management concept that has components to assist with health and performance. So all of this kind of works together to ensure that the server itself, if there is a problem, that action can be taken, that there can be a response, a reaction, throttling if necessary, and so all of this will work together. Going a little bit deeper on the concept of workload management, basically, an Exchange workload can be a server feature, a protocol, or a service that's defined as an Exchange system resource management. So when you look at an Exchange workload, it basically includes items that actually consume system resources. So whether it's CPU, database operations, Active Directory requests, and so forth. So some good examples that Microsoft provides of Exchange workloads includes things like Outlook Web App, Exchange ActiveSync, Mailbox Migration, the Managed Folder Assistant. All of these things are considered Exchange workloads. And so they're items that can be monitored. And so workloads are monitored, and there are system resource health indicators to measure the health of those workloads. And then there are system resource thresholds that, when met, kick off reactions, as we mentioned in some cases throttling. So these workloads can be throttled based on the health of the specific resource, and there are default settings in terms of knowing when a system resource reaches this unhealthy level. The classifications are already set and it's already locked in. It's a default setting. Now it's important to mention that these are the default settings because you actually can adjust them. You can make changes to the default settings that will apply to all of the servers in your organization. And you can make changes to workload management settings on specific servers in your organization. So you have this type of control. Now you might be wondering, well, wait a minute. I've been through all of the lessons. I've seen the entire Exchange Admin Center. I haven't seen a place where I can make adjustments in workload management, in policy settings and thresholds and so forth. Well, that's true. This is not done through the Exchange Admin Center. This is done through the Exchange Management Shell. So if you'd like to learn more about these policies and making adjustments, then I recommend that you research this through TechNet. Do some research on the terms workload management. Right now it's something that happens behind the scenes in Exchange, but by working with it you can actually fine-tune the policies and fine-tune how workload management works for you. Test commandlets are very important, but they're not exactly important from an administrative perspective. These test commandlets that are provided within Exchange, and with Exchange 2013 there are 32 test commandlets, as opposed to Exchange 2007 which has 17, and Exchange 2010 which has 29. So we have all of these different test commandlets that are built into Exchange, but what do we do with them as administrators? Well, there are a few important ones, and you can see them here. Test service health, test mail flow, test SMTP connectivity, test Outlook connectivity. We can use these commandlets especially when we're configuring Exchange for the first time, to just make sure that everything is working properly. But on a day-to-day basis, these commandlets are not used by Exchange administrators with regard to monitoring and troubleshooting. Really, it's third-party vendors that look at these test commandlets and they say to themselves, I'm going to create a solution that will help to monitor Exchange. And when they do that and they look for ways to actually reach in and test various services to make sure everything is up and running properly, they look at these test commandlets, they play with them, they get them to work as buttons instead of as Exchange Management Shell commandlets, and then they pretty much make it so that you can easily monitor the health of your Exchange environment. So it's nice to know that as an Exchange administrator, we have the ability to tap into these commandlets personally. We can open up the EMS and use these commandlets if we need. But it's also good to know that if you're a vendor, a third-party vendor working on things like this, you can use these same commandlets to enhance your product. Let's jump back over to the Exchange server and let's just kick off a couple of these different commandlets so you can see the results that come back when we use them. Alright, and let's jump over to the Exchange Management Shell. And by the way, if you're new to working with the Server 2012 or what we might call the Windows 8 interface, notice instead of going back here to the shell, we can always right-click and we can say pin to the taskbar, and then we can go back to desktop, and now here it is right on the taskbar. So that's something that if you use the Exchange Management Shell often enough, you might want to pin it right to the taskbar. So we'll select it there. Alright, and let's just shrink this down a little bit. Makes it easier to see. So what we're going to do is just type in a few of these test commandlets. If we type test, put the dash in, if we hit the tab key, we can tab through all 32 different test commandlets. In our case, we want the service health, and we're not going to utilize any parameters here, we're just going to hit enter. So this is very simple. If we just look up here, mailbox server role, are the required services running? True. Client access server role? True. Unified messaging server role? True. Hub transport server role? True. Now you might be thinking, wait a minute, we learned very, very early on that there's only two server roles, mailbox and client access server role. Yes, that's true, but these other server roles are being considered because they didn't update the commandlet here, and so obviously they're still important with regard to the response. So we do have unified messaging services, and so these are the services that have to be running. So it's looking at it from that perspective. Maybe this will be enhanced eventually, but I'm kind of happy that they still have this broken down this way, because if there was a problem with unified messaging, I would want this to say false. And if it was built into the mailbox server role only, then I'd have to go through all of the services and figure out which ones are unified messaging services, which ones are hub transport services, and so forth. So by breaking up the services and still leaving it this way, where we can see it based upon role, that actually makes my life a little bit easier if there are any services that are not running. So you can see that it even indicates that here. So this is a really good commandlet to utilize. If there's a problem, you can very quickly run a test service health commandlet and see what services are missing, and then you can jump out there and try and fix it. So if we were using the queue viewer and the queue started to back up, we can run this kind of a test here. We can see if services are down, and we can do this pretty quickly. Another good test commandlet is test mail flow. We can run test mail flow, and we can see some information as far as the result, success, message latency time. You can see if this is acceptable. We can see if it's a remote test. In this case, no. Is it a valid test? Object state. So some of this doesn't really help, but seeing success, that's always good. So mail flow is a good test. We can test SMTP connectivity, Outlook connectivity, and so forth. But again, remember, these commandlets, they're helpful to an Exchange administrator, and we might use these in terms of testing and seeing if things are correct for configuration purposes. Maybe when we're setting up Exchange Server for the first time, we use some of these commandlets to make sure everything is working properly. Or if we're having some trouble, some difficulty, we might read through forums. You should try these various test commandlets, and it will indicate what we're looking for in order to get responses back so that we can post that and get information back. So the various commandlets here are very helpful for configuration. But once you have your Exchange server up and running, once everything is working perfectly and you have no concerns, no worries, you'll have a period of time where nothing bad happens. Well, that's when you need to be thinking about monitoring your Exchange environment. And you don't use these test commandlets to do that. You don't manually go in and use test commandlets to monitor your environment. And as we mentioned, there is no built-in Exchange monitoring solution that really satisfies what we're looking for in terms of really big buttons that say green, everything is good, or red, we have a problem. So you have to make some decisions. And that's what we're going to do now. We're going to talk for a moment about what SpyTech Prime would do in a situation like this where they need to make some decisions with regard to their own monitoring and their troubleshooting procedures when it comes to Exchange if something were to fail. So with regard to SpyTech Prime and monitoring and troubleshooting Exchange, here's what we're going to do. SpyTech Prime wants to bring monitoring up to a new level. So the features that are built into Exchange 2013, they're not good enough for SpyTech Prime. So they're going to be looking for an outside solution. Right now they're evaluating System Center Operations Manager, which, being that it's built by Microsoft itself, is probably one of the most robust solutions available. However, it's not necessarily the easiest to deploy. However, it's probably one of the most robust solutions available. And at the same time, what's nice about System Center Operations Manager is that it's not just for Exchange. You can use it with other management packs to monitor your entire Exchange environment. However, it's not necessarily the easiest thing in the world to deploy. And so many look to third-party tools from companies like GSX, eNow, and others in order to find a tool that is easier to deploy and easier to really work with than System Center Operations Manager. So SpyTech Prime is going to evaluate all of these different tools and make a decision as far as bringing their monitoring up to that next level. And then at the same time, they will also establish clear troubleshooting policies based upon known issues, and they'll document these. Really, that's the best thing to do in terms of troubleshooting, is to have a definite troubleshooting path and have procedures in place to ensure that when something does come up, there is a path that's established so that others can follow the path, or you can do it yourself, and so you can track down the source of the problem. So we hope you found this informative. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next lesson.